Legal considerations are undoubtedly crucial for marketplace platforms, and Stephen Fusco, or Dr. Fusco as he is rightly called, is here to discuss the importance of integrating the legal team into your business operations, how to cultivate a collaborative relationship with them, and why their insights are vital, not just for legal considerations, but for company growth, risk management, lots of things that are going to be on the top of mind of marketplace leaders day to day. So we're excited for this episode, and we'll get right into it. Well, Stephen is the Director of Legal Affairs and Data Security at HopSkipDrive, which is an incredible marketplace, and we'll talk a little bit about that later, but he has an extensive legal background. I called him Dr. Fusco. He has a JD and a PhD, and so I'm even just hearing him talk, it's not the background. This guy has an incredible knowledge of how marketplaces operate, and so he's got a lot of really good insights for us to be able to foster a proactive and integrated approach between the legal team and the rest of your marketplace. So with all that being said, Stephen, thank you so much for joining us. And I think a good place for you to start might be just, why is this a topic that you are passionate about? Why is this something that you wanted to go into today?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. No need to call me Dr. Fusco, I promise, but I appreciate the call out. I think I've just come far enough along in my career, having been in the legal field for so long, and then I stepped away for a while and I've come back, that I think it's fascinating and interesting the way legal teams interact with multiple parts of an organization, especially in the marketplace, but also startups, both young, medium, and long-term into their growth cycle. And so I just think it's an opportunity that I continue to learn in and always get questions from people. Mm-hmm. Just how do you work your legal team? And someone will say, well, what do you do with your product team? Or how do you handle privacy? And it's always something that I learn about every day. And I think other people are always wanting to know more about how different teams are organized.
That's awesome. And so the topic specifically of integrating your legal team with the rest of the organization, what did you see? What do you see currently in marketplaces that makes you think that's a topic that probably needs to be covered?
Yeah. Well, first, I definitely want to make sure, we have a senior VP of legal who predated me. And so, one thing I would say is that she actually sort of instilled this culture and a lot of what I'm going to talk about today into it. But when I think about what legal teams are, I think there's two general ilks. There's the ones where the legal team sort of is off on the side. They address risk, they address legal issues, they respond to requests, and it's much more of a siloed approach to it. And then I think the other approach that I often see is where legal teams are fully integrated into the day-to-day conversations that the company is having about all of the issues, and they're really there as a thought partner. And where I tend to fall on it is more, on the thought partner side of that conversation, because I think if I'm going to be able to be successful in what I do, and if I want the least amount of stress in my day, being integrated is the way to go, to make sure that you're looking at risks, you're looking at the legal issues and all of those things before they happen, rather than being sort of the last man at the table, and then trying to mitigate, let's just say, a risk in a product improvement that's already been built out by the engineering team. And then you're trying to decide, well, given the expenditure of cash, given the expenditure of people, given the expenditure of resources, now what do we do? Are we going to scrap that effort? Whereas if you bring the legal team in as a thought partner early on, I think it has a much better outcome for everybody involved.
Yeah, I could see how also just being proactive kind of and talking with legal, having a collaborative relationship is probably going to fare better for the legal team as well. Like, I know something you've mentioned, and correct me if I'm wrong on connecting these two things, but I know you've mentioned that a lot of times people see the legal team as the know people. And when you have this collaborative relationship, it opens up a lot more opportunity for them to be seen as partners. And so I would love to hear from you. What do you think the perception is of legal within marketplaces, and how would you want to define that perception differently?
Yeah, I think that's great observation that you made about sort of the legal team being the know people. Um, I like to think of our team and what our senior VP of Legal and Policy mentored me and guided me to help to understand, and I hopefully do that for the members on my team and in other teams, is that my job really isn't to say yes or no to anything. My job is to be a thought partner with the organization and say, if you want to do this, here are the risks that you face in doing it. Here are the business benefits that could come. And then you do a risk benefit analysis, right? And you just are weighing out those risks and benefits. And so I don't think my job is to say yes or no. My job is to hopefully be a thoughtful partner with all of the teams and all of the cross-functional teams I work with, and give them a fair assessment of, these are the risks, these are the business benefits. And the other thing I will say is that, I'm not the business person. So I'm not in the day-to-day weeds of necessarily understanding every aspect of the company. And so if I come at a decision and say no immediately, just based on my narrow legal lens, I might be missing some important things that might change my legal analysis, or it changes that sort of risk benefit scale that I'm looking at on a daily basis to say, in this instance, now that I think about it that way, yeah, maybe that is an okay risk, we can take. Or, oh, now that you're telling me some more about it, maybe it's not really as risky as I once thought it was. And so that's why I think it's so important to not just be, the know people, but really to be the people that are thought partners and are always looking at it from the perspective of what information might others have to share with me that is going to impact the way I think about it.
Yeah, and I think that idea, and which is just reality, that most of the law for you guys is going to be a gray area. For most people, it's going to be a gray area. That's where you get to navigate because people's perception, if they don't understand that, and they think it's all black and white, then you're either the yes or no people. It's within that gray area that you get to be the collaborative partners who help to find the best solution and mitigate risk. So that's really interesting to me. I would love to hear, who do you think is responsible for kind of building that collaborative environment between legal and the rest of the organization? And do you have any like practical thoughts around how, if someone's building a marketplace, or maybe just building this legal function, how they could do that well so that it stays collaborative and toward those company goals?
That's a great question. The short answer is I think it's everybody's responsibility. So I don't think it lies with any one particular person, or it's entirely dependent on legal to do that, because it doesn't matter, what team we're talking about, especially at a startup where they're small and they're very collaborative, very cross-functional. You have to instill it across the company among all stakeholders, from the C-suite all the way down to the individuals, to make them understand why it's important to have that mindset and that culture. And so you do have to build a culture around it, where the legal team is thought of as the thought partner. They're not thought of as the yes or no person who sits over in their corner and just responds and produces emails with recommendations, but is really someone that is part of the team and involved in making the decisions. Now, my job on the legal team is to make sure that I don't become that person who is just the yes or no person, right? That I want to hear the perspectives of somebody else, and I want to hear the business side of it. I think for any company that's looking at this role and the function and how you integrate, I think it's very important for folks just to be willing to roll up their sleeves and want to learn about other aspects of the company. A good example I can offer you is it's important for me to understand the care driver acquisition on the HopSkipDrive platform so that I can then provide guidance on certain issues. HopSkipDrive is a transportation network company similar to Uber, Lyft, and other companies. And so, if I don't invest the time to get to know how the supply team operates and all of the constraints that go into decision making and business cases and those sorts of things, then I can't really do a good job to counsel. And so it's incumbent on me in the legal department. And again, this is where our senior VP of legal did such an amazing job when she onboarded me, and I continue to do that, is sit in on meetings with other teams, ask to be part of those conversations, ask the questions, even if they're stupid questions. I think it's incumbent upon other teams to understand the legal aspects of things. And so I try and explain them in a very common way for everyone to understand. But I think it's incumbent on the other stakeholders to also want to get to understand a particular statute or regulation and what it means and our perspective on what it means so that they can inform their decisions as well.
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, collaboration then is just it requires multiple parties to be collaborative, right? So I love the examples there. That's really helpful stuff to think through. And one way I know that you've mentioned legal's ability to kind of go out and learn and collaborate with another team is specifically with product and understanding and knowing the product, which you actually kind of dug into a little bit there. But I would love, maybe just because I think it'd be valuable for other members of legal and for marketplace leaders to know, is what is the value for your legal team to have in-depth knowledge about your product? And have you seen any examples of that value in your work at HopSkipDrive?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I personally find that to be the most fascinating aspect of my job. So, just a tiny bit of history. I came from a traditional corporate and transactional background, represented commercial real estate companies and did a lot of commercial transactions. If you had told me I was going to go work for a tech startup and be focused on transportation network companies, I would have laughed at you. I would have said, absolutely not. Like, there's just not a part of me. But the technology is fascinating from me. It is also what is often for startups the fastest moving piece, right? Is that the product is constantly trying to evolve and get better, and there's multiple iterations, and you're figuring out how to make this product more marketable to the market so that they want to use it. And so they're moving at an astronomical pace to make that happen in a startup. And so they're not going to be able to see all of the legal pitfalls that come along, right? To my point earlier, they're not the legal team. They don't have to, just as well as I'm not a coder or an engineer and I don't understand how to build the app. But if you have those conversations proactively, then we can anticipate those things and we can have those conversations in real time versus those scenarios, which I mentioned, which are they're about to release an update to the product. And you say, wait, have you thought about X, Y, and Z? Best area I can give you is data privacy. And without going into the specifics and the weeds, data privacy is a young field that's evolving right now in the United States as we see it. Obviously GDPR is well ahead, and for those companies that are in the EU and are under GDPR jurisdiction, they've been thinking about this for a while. We haven't in the United States. Some privacy laws have been out there, but if product is just moving at lightning speed and we're not included, the legal team, then when it comes to a point and you say, oh, wait a minute, there's maybe this sharing of information that might be covered under CCPA, CPRA in California, we have to do X, Y, and Z. We've now stopped a launch that was on a certain timeline and have to go back and fix it. Whereas if legal's involved on the front end, those conversations have happened, everybody's in communication, and you've anticipated it. The other thing I would say is if you involve legal and product early, you get to innovate faster. So in my mind, to your point originally, which is this collaboration effort, the more you have a different, a thought leader in this space. So, you wouldn't often think, well, why do I want to involve legal in conversations about product? We know about product, but you often find creative solutions, creative improvements, different ways of thinking about it, which potentially let you scale faster. And so I think that as well is an important reason to include legal with product so that you can have those conversations. Legal can often help people problem solve and think of it and say, okay, this might raise a privacy concern, but if we do this, and this, we can overcome that concern. And then, you're helping product's helping you. And I just think it makes for a much more enriching process for all the people involved.
That's really interesting to me. I think that when you are trying to grow quickly, you often focus on doing things really fast, and you're focusing a lot on these short-term gains, short-term wins, and I think that's necessary. But when you're thinking about growth, like sustainable long-term growth or even scalability, you have to be thinking long-term from the get-go. And that's what I wish a lot of companies would see, not even like on legal, but even on the growth side, on the revenue side, is you have to be thinking long-term early on if you ever want to hit a point where you scale, or you're going to hit a wall at some point. And I think that's the same thing as or at least similar to what you're saying, is you need to be having these long-term considerations about risk early on, so that you can make the right assessment and make sure that you're able to grow when the time comes for you to scale, that you're able to do that well, and not have some major, data incident, or, whatever it might be. So that's really interesting to me. And then that kind of pulls me back to something that you were talking about earlier, which is, there are different risk philosophies, early stage versus late stage. And so I would love to hear, how does that affect legal strategy? What are the differences in those early and late stage risk philosophies?
Wow. Whew. Yeah,
sorry for that. It's kind of a big question.
No, it's not. I think for me, I don't know that it's an early or a late stage question, because I think fundamentally some of it is driven by product type. Good example. We arrange transportation for children. That inherently involves a different kind of risk profile than maybe a fintech product might, although they have their own set of risks, right? And so I think that there's a certain amount of it that doesn't matter if you're early or late. That risk profile looks different based on your consumers, the type of information you're using or sharing or leveraging. But at the end of the day, I think that companies should be thinking about risk in some ways differently depending on where they are, and I think that's healthy. The problem, though, is when you begin to scale and grow, the companies that don't want to reevaluate and be open to shifting their risk philosophy could potentially run into problems. Good example. You might be a very young startup and you're willing to take on all of this liability in a contract and unlimited caps on indemnities and special damages and all of these things because you really want to sign that contract. We have always done it this way, or we used to do it this way. And so that becomes a proxy that we continue to do something the same way. Well, no, because the business benefits change. The business risks have changed. And so I think that companies have to be willing to evaluate. And I think why I was a little hesitant on the idea that it's early stage or late stage, I think it's more dependent on sort of factors within the organization. A good example might be, a company might get sued early in their life cycle And so they were originally very bullish, and they might want to need to stay that way for sustainable growth. That risk of that litigation and that type of exposure is significant enough that they have to pull their reins back, even in an early stage. And so I don't like to say that, you should always be risk tolerant as a early startup, because, quite honestly, arranging transportation for children is inherently a special type of relationship you have. And so you always want to have that mindset, which is why, HopSkipDrive safety is at our core. It's always our focus. And so that's one thing I wanted to come back to and say is that no matter where you are in the life cycle, I think the organization needs to be grounded in a clear set of values that drive their decision making. But if you sacrifice some of those core values that make you who you are as a company, you're going to lose your compass, in my opinion. And then your whole perspective on that risk balance becomes skewed, because you no longer sort of have your North Star that is what you're using to evaluate and make some decisions. And so you get inconsistent decisions across the company. One day you might be willing to take this risk, the next day you're not, and you're not quite sure why that risk profile has changed. It's because it's not grounded in sort of the core values and beliefs of the organization as a whole.
It's really important to know what you care about. I think those key metrics, that's missing a lot of times just from the top down in a lot of organizations, and it affects every single team to not know, even as a company, what do you care about most? What are we all working toward together? So that's really, really helpful. And we're going to start coming to a close here. There's, so much good stuff that you've shared, Stephen, so thank you for that. But I'm going to ask you to do another impossible thing here and say, of all of this great stuff, if you were to boil it down to one takeaway for marketplace leaders, what would that big takeaway be?
I think organizations should really, I hope they view their legal departments as thought partners that aren't just coming in to evaluate a provision of a contract or interpret a regulation or something like that, but they do view them as having more to offer to the overall company and organization. The second thing I would say is make sure that you are building a legal team that's diverse and can handle a wide variety of issues. Because early on in startups, it is a general counsel role. It's kind of like you go to your primary care doctor, you see 100 different things on a daily basis. And so you want to make sure that your people on the legal team have the expertise. Obviously, we are a company that arranges safe, reliable transportation to get students to and from school. And so, of course, we want to make sure people have expertise in education on our team. We also want to make sure that they can handle, if an employment issue comes up, or a worker classification, or a regulatory issue, or any of those things, that they can answer it. And sometimes organizations can get into this mindset of, I need somebody that can do X. And they find that subject matter expertise, which is brilliant on a particular topic. But when it comes to 95% of the other things, especially on young legal teams where, you maybe only have the budget for one or two, you're then going to be using outside counsel that is going to cost you way more money than if you had maybe looked at more of a generalist to fill that role who can respond to a broad range of issues.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense to me. And then I want to end with one just kind of fun question.
Sure.
And say, put aside all of your legal expertise and think outside of this realm. What would be maybe one piece of advice you would give to marketplace leaders and any other part of leadership or marketplace as an organization?
I'm going to go back to what we talked about a little bit ago, because it's so important to me. It's always make sure that you're passionate about what you're doing. So in the middle of my legal career, I left and I became a special education teacher in a psychiatric hospital for kids with severe emotional and behavioral disabilities. I now still to this day have a passion for the disability community, that drives what I do. I have the privilege of working at a company whose mission is tied to that. And I can't just say enough that if you don't have skin in the game of wanting to do this, whatever it is, my husband, works for a company that deals with data storage. And believe it or not, he's as passionate as I am about individuals with disabilities. And I think that's fantastic. I don't get it, but it's fantastic. But if you don't have that, I think it makes it difficult to do your job, and to want to be at that company.
That's good. So that's actually something I was just talking about earlier today as well. That's really important to me. If you don't believe in what you're doing, you're not going to work as hard at it or do as well at it. And it's really important to have passion for it. So
Yeah.
that's awesome. And I know you guys are doing awesome stuff at HopSkipDrive. And so I want to just encourage the listeners to this, to go and follow HopSkipDrive on LinkedIn. There'll be links in the show notes to do that and to check them out on their website. And then go and follow Steven on LinkedIn and just keep up with all the cool stuff that they're doing. Is there anything else, Steven, that you would like me to point people to, or that I could put in the show notes for you?
No, I think that's fantastic. Our website, interestingly, has some incredible blog posts, some case studies. Just there's a wealth. In fact, I don't know that I've seen everything on there. So no, I just, any day somebody wants to learn a little bit more about what we do or what I do, I'm just honored that someone wants to know about my lived experience. And I equally try and do the same about people I interact with. So would welcome any of those LinkedIn connections or opportunities.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for sharing. This has been incredible. I feel like a lot of really good advice on a number of different topics too. So I really appreciate that, Stephen. Thanks for giving us some of your time, and I'm sure our audience and listeners will really love this and benefit from it. So kind of you. Thank you for coming on. You're welcome back on anytime. And to the rest of you guys, thanks for being part of the community that we have. Thanks for not just listening, but interacting and sharing with us. And I think we're all learning from each other here. So I really appreciate you guys for being here with us. And we'll catch you in the next episode.